I'd like to introduce is Dr. Helen Neville, President of Division 45. Helen, you want to talk a little bit about radical healing and just this theme that we have going on this year?
Thank you so much, Grace. And thanks a lot for the introduction and reminding us about the ground rules. Before I begin, I want to thank those who are in attendance. I'm very excited about this. And I want to thank what I refer to as the DREAM team, which are the task force members of what we're calling kind of radical healing. And so Dr. Brianna French and Della Mosley are co-chairing that. And Dr. Grace Chen, Dr. Gioni Lewis, Dr. Hector Adames, and Dr. Nayeli Chavez are members. And it's just been a joy for me to work with them and to learn from them. And I'm excited to see what the remaining part of the year holds for us. So just in terms of this initial theme about healing through, promoting healing through social justice, as many of you probably have been feeling the weight of current issues, whether it's what was going on in Standing Rock or the police shootings or the ISIS attacks or a whole range of things that are attacking people in our communities, it weighs heavily on us psychologically. And I spent a good part of my career looking at the impact of these types of racial incidents on our psychological well-being. And so I understood it personally and know about it professionally. But a turning point really for me was living in Tanzania for an academic year and just feeling what it felt like to have the weight of this type of oppression lifted. So while there were other issues I dealt with, I did not have to deal with racial oppression. And when I got back, people were like, "Oh, wow, Helen, you look fabulous after this." And really was, my body showed so much better from being in an environment that was affirming and healthy. And so the idea about promoting radical healing is not how we can get along with white community and individuals and confronting them about racism, although that might be a piece of it. But how is it, what do we need to do for ourselves, among ourselves, to promote healing from racial oppression and their various intersecting forms of oppression, whether it's class exploitation, gender oppression, homophobia, and you kind of name it, that really wears on us. And so that's a little bit about some of the impetus for this and wanting to enter a national dialogue because I think that we all have lots to contribute to this. The reason why there's a concept of radical in front of this is, one, we want to look at the root causes of some of our distress and not just blame it somehow just on ourselves. And some of these root causes are steeped in structural issues. And so how do we treat individuals understanding these kind of structural constraints, as well as acknowledging the tremendous amount of strength and resiliency that we have within our communities. So that's a little bit about the background. I feel like I go on, but I realize this is your space. And so now I want to kind of turn it over to the folks that will be co-facilitating, but also want to just acknowledge the three folks, the three students for sharing their expressions and opinions and expertise. And I'm really looking forward to learning from Dasa, Francis, and Ruben as we move forward. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Helen. Hi, everyone. I think I know most of you, but yeah, my name's Della Mosley. I use the pronouns she, her, hers. I'm so glad we can have this space today. We had a radical healing chat on Twitter the other day, and it got me so filled and fired up talking about, yeah, healing and justice and what liberation can look like for us. And so Grace and I thought that for the first of our webinar series, focusing on students would be a great place to start. For me, I'm on internship at Duke and in the last stage of this process. And I'm often thinking about positions of power and privilege as I'm transitioning from this, preparing to transition from the student role to a professor role, and working with students who are on have different levels of power and privilege. And so at this stage, I think I've been thinking a lot more about what I came to the field for, why I wanted to practice psychology. And I wondered if that could be a jumping off point for us to talk about maybe what our hopes were when we entered our programs, when we started to fill out an application for the first time, because hope is definitely a big part of radical healing, and being able to reconnect to that feels important. Would anyone want to kick us off on what their hopes were when they started?
Oh, okay. So should I introduce myself first? So, hey everybody. My name is Ruben Filogi, and I am a fifth year doctoral student / candidate at the University of Missouri, studying counseling psychology. I'm almost finished my training. I'll be on internship soon. So that's like my human introduction, and then the other identity I like to identify as is a spirit in a body bag, and I think that'll come back up in my chat. But the question was about my hopes as I entered my program. It's funny to think back. It feels so long ago, but then it also feels like yesterday. But I think talking a little bit about where I was before I got to grad school helped. But I had the opportunity to be a student athlete at the University of Georgia, which was really big for different reasons. Obviously, I had a very unique undergrad experience, which I tell people was in a bubble, from I think maybe other students of color, Black males of color, because you're just in an environment where it's more diverse in some ways, but it's goal-oriented. You're there to play a sport. So I think those experiences protected me in some ways from some of the challenges, but in other ways, there were also other unique challenges. And I tell people as I went through the student athlete journey, my eyes started to become open about how that environment was influencing the way I was thinking about myself and the world around me. I remember Trayvon Martin happened, and it wasn't that I didn't care, but it was like it didn't connect with me because it wasn't a part of my everyday experience. And I felt like I tended to be one of the more critical thinkers in those spaces for different reasons. I think, growing up with Nigerian parents, education was always a important value, but it still didn't touch me. And so when I got to grad school, I knew it was a very different environment. I was no longer an athlete, so I could focus on this academic or intellectual side. And in some ways, I thought that my program, because it's one of the top programs in counseling psychology, I felt like it was the program's responsibility to mold me into this critical learner who was then going to go impact communities. Not only my program, but the University of Missouri in some ways was going to mold me into this scholar who was going to help the world. And, as my story shows, that's not the case. And, we can we'll probably dive deeper into that as we progress. But I guess the hope was that the institution, the people at the institution were going to somehow mold me into this change agent.
Yeah, thank you for that, Ruben. I definitely feel that. I walked into my program like, yep, I'm gonna go. I came to counseling psychology thinking that after working at a Job Corps center and working in school counseling in Baltimore, and was like, oh, I'm gonna go do counseling psychology and save all the babies, and this program is gonna set me up to do that. And I don't know, that all the pieces are gonna be in place to affirm me in that process, and I'll be able to get this education about ethnic minority psychology and how to help youth who are marginalized, based on race and sexuality. And so, yeah, I definitely had that hope for the system to be able to hold me. What about for others?
I guess I'll respond next, if that's okay. So I came into psychology later on in my life. I started off doing sociology. And after I got my bachelor's in sociology and I went out into the working world, I was like, there's something that was missing. And so I went back to school and studied mental health because of my own experiences in the professional world and what I was seeing. And I felt that my sociology wasn't really enough to kind of explain some of that. And so from there, I started going into counseling psychology, and I loved it. And I was like, oh, this is great. You know, to talk about marginalized people, and this is the stuff that I've been seeing. And so when I applied to my program, I probably should have introduced myself. I'm Frances. I'm a third-year PhD student at Howard University. And so when I applied to my program, I was very intentional about it. I wanted to be at Howard because I wanted to be taught by Black people. I thought it was the place that I could go for liberation. And I didn't quite realize how challenging it would be, not just in terms of the space of being at Howard, but also just in terms of the discipline of counseling psychology, which from my experience has sometimes been very restrictive. You know, intellectually, because there's certain things that I would like to introduce into the field. And sometimes it's like pulling teeth to try to get it validated as worthy of its own investigation. And so that has been some of the challenges. And I'm sure we'll, like Ruben said, we'll kind of talk about that further, but that's where I am.
Well, maybe this would be a good time to kind of shift. Thank you, Frances, for that, into that idea of like, so it sounds like you're coming in with great hopes, and you too, Della. And maybe you all could talk about, you know, how some of those original hopes have diminished over time, and you know, what has come up, what have you experienced?
You know, I don't want to be the guy that keeps on going in this group of women. So if nobody else wants to go, I'll go. Cool. All right. It's such a journey because looking back, I had all the good intentions, you know, to be molded into, I mean, it was almost like I was a blank slate. I just wanted to learn. And like, I remember going to different people and trying to get their ideas for what this looked like. Actually, I remember this, it was actually a feeling of ambiguity, like, where is my space here? And then August 2014, Michael Brown was shot and killed. And I don't know if it was because I was no longer a student athlete and like I could focus on things in a different way, or I don't know if it was because of the proximity to Ferguson, St. Louis, Missouri. But this thing hit me very, 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 very hard. It was almost like a veil was lifted off my eyes. And I was just bothered. And like, for whatever reason before that, I never saw myself as one of these Black males who was getting killed, you know? And so it was one thing to experience that, but it was another thing to see how people in my space were reacting to this thing. And it was almost as if like there was an elephant in the room and nobody wanted to confront this thing. And it was very alienating. And this is from my peers, this is from, you know, faculty. And it's not any one faculty, this is a lot of different faculties, some faculty of color. And it was just like a taboo thing that nobody wanted to talk about. But it was this thing that I definitely was experiencing. So I know at least other Black students on campus, particularly from St. Louis and Ferguson, were experiencing these things. And the issue itself was already traumatizing, but to see that silence and that lack of dialogue about what was happening, and it was like another layer of trauma, to the point where I just started speaking up. It's like, hold on, like what's going on? Like, we're a social justice program, like, because in my head I'm thinking, because some of this is in my head too, because in my head my idea of what a social justice oriented space or program or institution is with these values is we're going to go to Ferguson and take our ideas there and make it a better place. We're going to take buses and all go. And then when people started looking at me like, what do you mean? We can't say anything about this. There's nothing we can do. Like, it became very alienating. I think in my class, for different reasons, my classes, for different reasons, it was hard for people to open up about these things. People of color felt like it wasn't their responsibility to teach, which it isn't in some instances. White folks felt like, they didn't want to say the wrong thing, so they said nothing. And to me, this is just alienating. Like, there's no space to have this conversation. So what happened is I started to find spaces that would validate where I was at, would validate the pain I was at, we're talking about these things in a way that was meaningful to me. And that pushed me to my first protest in December of 2014 that was hosted by a group called MU for Mike Brown. 3 queer Black women were already on this. They already recognized that our institution, the University of Missouri, was being reactive to this thing. And they actually held a die-in. It was the first bout of activism I participated in, and it was one of the most powerful moments in my life because people had a synergy about what was going on in the world and how we wanted to move forward. It was very powerful for me. Oh, snap.
Thank you, Ruben. I like how you followed that up with kind of what happened after that. Like it just didn't sit well with you, and you felt moved to do something. And I'm wondering, and I think that will naturally come out of the conversations too, if people can also speak to like, how did you actively resist your hope being diminished? I mean, Ruben, I just hear you saying like, wait a minute, this is not what I signed up for. So something's got to change. But then there's this sense of like, the burden's on you. And that takes a lot of energy.
Yeah, I mean, I think I definitely second what Ruben was saying, but I think for me, it was compounded by the fact that being at a historically Black institution and the expectation that people look like me. I think if I was in being in other spaces where I was at a predominantly white institution, I never expected them to necessarily go above and beyond when these issues started coming about. But being at a historically Black college, I was like, of course we're gonna go out and march. Of course we're gonna go out protest. Of course we're gonna go out and support these activists on the ground. And of course that never happened. And so I found myself being so for me, when we're talking about radical healing, for me, the healing was actually going out and doing the work that I expected the program to go and do. Because it didn't sit well with me to just be in that academic space. So for me, it was like, okay, well, the program's not doing it. How do you take that responsibility on and go out and meet with people, go to the protests, meet with local community organizations that are doing the work. My own work in terms of my dissertation and my academic pursuits started to be based in that, because that is where I found my release. And I needed that to sustain myself because it didn't sit well with me to be removed and to not do anything.
Oof, there's like that extra layer of like being in your own in community with your people, surrounded by them, and then witnessing that stagnancy and having to create lanes where you expected them to be is like an added layer of loss, it sounds like. Yeah, it's heavy and real. What do other people, whether you're visible or not, want to share about hopes and how they've diminished from when you came into your programs?
I also wanted to add in there, you're sort of touching on it, Frances, that there are different areas. So if not in your program, maybe through your own research, and also maybe even in your clinical training spaces, folks who are doing the face-to-face work every day. I'm wondering if those are also other spaces. I mean, it could be, similar, your expectations maybe haven't been met, or maybe they have been met, and just a different experience once you're in a different space. So I just wanted to put that out there too. That's like so many different areas that you're probably engaged in if you're in a clinical or counseling type program.
I'm wondering if I could also speak too. So my name's Gabe, Gabe Corpus. I'm a second year in a clinical psychology program at Palo Alto University. And I kind of want to echo what both Ruben and Francis have said, kind of coming from my own perspective of coming into my program as someone who's really dedicated and inspired to work with Asian American populations, both clinically and research-wise. I specifically chose Palo Alto University, located in the Bay Area, because of the high Asian American population and because of so many great faculty and staff and resources that are dedicated to kind of what I want to learn. And so my hopes were high, and I think they still are as a young student, that those interests will be met. But I think part of the fatigue that comes with it is seeing this dichotomy of, you know, the priorities of, you know, what you have to be as a student, your priorities as a student to go to classes, I just finished applying to practicum sites and doing all those required and important training goals, but also meeting your own personal motivations for doing this work, which is very personal. And I feel like it, at least for me, it's fueled by my own personal desire to work with this population. But there's this difference between, you know, standardized requirements as a student and then what you want as a person to grow as a professional, as just who you are, very much identity development stuff. And maybe it'll change. So my hopes aren't dashed. It's just more of seeing the requirements and feeling the fatigue of having to go essentially above and beyond the standard requirements of the program to do what you want, to advocate, to meet more people, to get involved. And there's just not enough time in the day for that, not enough energy to do that. And it's really tiring work. And sometimes it's necessary to reflect on how important that is for not only just you being a student, but also just you as a person.
I see a lot of heads nodding. I think we feel you, Gabe, just that above, you have to do what everyone else is doing and then some, right? If you want to be able to address the issues that you came in to address. And I'm just going to throw in just a quick, I feel you, Francis, this idea of, you know, we have these expectations. There aren't a lot of Asian American mentors in the field. And so when I finally had an Asian American supervisor, I had high expectations, and maybe it wasn't fair, but, and they weren't met. They weren't even close. And so it was disappointing. But for me, I've had a lot of great Black female psychologist mentors, Latina psychologist mentors, and white mentors. So, I mean, I think we end up finding those spaces, but it is really different when you have expectations of your own community, and sometimes that isn't met, and then kind of getting refueled. Okay, then I want to fill that space for someone else in the future too, moving forward. So this is kind of related too. So I'm wondering, like, how have you all, you know, actively resisted, you know, forms of like challenging spaces? And the resistance can come in a lot of different forms. So just wanted to see what people have to say.
I'll go first this time. I think for me, it's again, like, it as much as it's been hard, because I mean, right now, for example, Howard is currently in the news, and I was talking to Della about it before we started, and there's a protest happening where they're having a sit-in, and so after we meet, I'm gonna go out there and give supplies and stay there for a little bit. I wish I could stay there the whole time, but you know, still got to get a PhD, so unfortunately I can't. But it's like making those types of accommodations, right? So on one hand, doing what needs to be done, but at the same time being committed to those values and those ideals. And so the way I've done that is still remaining to be involved, but also having to kind of negotiate how much I can be involved. Looking for opportunities like this where I can talk about my experiences and talk with other people about their experiences. having open conversations with colleagues about challenges that they have, and being in a position, because one of my roles in my program is I am the program graduate assistant. So having conversations with colleagues about their challenges and things that they would like to see different, and bringing that back to faculty and administration. I also have advocated for there to be a student representative that goes to meetings, that can report back to the student body about what is being discussed, so that we're not finding out at the back end when decisions have already been made. So I think, trying to negotiate how much you can be involved, but also doing it, because I think for me, the work goes beyond what I want personally in terms of my own career or desires. It's more about what needs to be done for the community. And so having that type of commitment means that it's not just about, oh, I want to be involved with community organizations. Like, no, I need to be involved because I recognize that there's a need for me in that space, or need for people like me in that space. And so, yeah, I mean, I think as a marginalized person, you kind of have to, and that is the burden that we have, and it's overwhelming, but also, one, trying to figure out where we can enter or where we can be, and creating those spaces, but also trying to draw on the strengths of colleagues and people that maybe they either don't know how to get involved, or they do know and they are not sure exactly how they can go about doing it. So you being the person to kind of bring that message or connect them in some way. So that's how I've done it.
You've been busy, Frances. We've been busy. Like, going back to kind of Gabe's point, like, it's so tiring. What you just listed off is so much, such a tax emotionally, physically, like, and I feel it too. I think that, I don't know if I have like one example that's coming to mind for me with the way that I've resisted, but it's like, I'm thinking more about how I've had to be so spontaneous. The way this climate is, it's like we're having to shift all the time and respond to so many different things. So when I first got to Lexington, Kentucky, after living in Baltimore and DC, I'm like, oh my gosh, how do I even just adjust to responding to people who, like, try to send me to a back door of a building or something, And so it's like, resistance was finding spaces that were safe for me. Resistance was calling folks out and places out. But then also, you talk about Mike Brown and that being like such a seminal moment for us. So then resistance shifted to, how can I expand critical consciousness of like young folks, and how can I help people to learn how to do activism work and research it myself, and like show up to the protest. And so it's just like so different every day. And maybe that's one of the struggles of it. It's like, I'm learning how to be good at resisting through research. I'm trying to learn how to be good at learning to resist through my counseling practice, and how to raise critical consciousness with the clients that I'm working with on internship. And for me as an individual, also just like part of my resistance is learning when not to resist, and how to check in with myself on when I can and can't engage, and like figuring out how to like refuel myself and squat up so that I can make it through the next thing. And so I guess I'm just reflecting on how different it has to be every day, and how that's shifted in all the different spaces I've been in.
Well, follow-up question. Thank you for sharing, Della. What gives all of you the strength and energy to keep doing this work? It's hard work to be, to show up, so what gives you strength?
This question is, so this question and the one you asked before are related for me. Because the way I see and have seen activism and resistance has shifted as I've changed as a person. And I think my efforts, in resistance from graduate school, if I can just go back and answer that question, started with myself. You remember how I said like it was like something wasn't right and this veil was lifted off my eye? It was a decision to either go down this path of learning, which is scary and it's ambiguous, and I don't know what's down there. I'm learning about myself and the world. And then there's another road that says, I don't have to. I can kind of just do what I need to do the bare minimum, and make this thing happen. And I chose the path that was maybe a little bit more challenging at first. So it seemed, and it's been so rewarding, because when I started asking those questions of myself, it said, what kind of society do we live in? Like, why are there, these systems of oppression that, pit two groups against each other, one that has privilege and one that's subordinated? Why is this happening with people? Why are institutions like this? There's a lot of questions I was asking that I think naturally created this this change agent or activist. If you would have asked me in fall 13, are you interested in going to a protest? Would you? I would have said, for what? Why? But because of what was going on at the institution, what was going on nationally, how it was affecting me, I went through a week of depression where I didn't want to eat, I didn't want to sleep. All I wanted to learn was, how did this Black man die? This Black boy who was going to go to college die. Could have been me a couple months ago. And so I think that questioning led me to go to my first protest. It led me to want to understand what oppression was, what sexism was, what racism was, what heterosexism was. Because racism was a thing, but I also had my own things. I also was, was dealing with some intense homophobia that I was working out. Because how could I advocate for these issues, this subordinated group as people of color, but then also be an oppressor in certain ways to people who are sexual minorities? It didn't make sense. So that was tough. I had to peel back layers of this onion, so to speak. But it was challenging, but I was also finding a very authentic part of myself. I was learning, all right, well, you've been told who you are. Who are you really? What does it really mean to be a Black male, educated Black male? Because I never realized it. People really get intimidated when you're educated and you're a person of color, and because people walk around with these ideas, you're not supposed to be here. You're not supposed to do this. And I think unconsciously, they don't want to talk about things that matter to you. Or when you do bring things up, it becomes threatening instead of this, just a conversation maybe. So all that goes to say is, I think this journey into the self created how I became active or a change agent. And then, the story is written about how that swell built up into the perfect storm, into Concerned Student 1950, which would eventually spread across the globe. I don't know, we'll have time to touch into that. But essentially, the energy that drove me was asking questions of myself and the world around me. Now, I am less concerned about who I am and more concerned about what I am. And me and Della have talked about this. But I think that for me, understanding that we're all in this human experience and we're trying to figure it out has been the most liberating understanding / revelation that I've ever done, because now I understand that we are these vast multidimensional beings that have power to do things, and people tend to use that oftentimes what we're seeing now is people use that power over people, and we don't use it with each other anymore. And that's why you have, white folks targeting people of color. That's why you have men subordinating women. You're not using our power with each other, and we create these systems of oppression. So my energy comes from remembering what we really are. And I think remembering that helps me channel my energy into creating things that brings people back together.
Thank you, Ruben. That's a powerful statement. I'm wondering what others have to say. Where do you find your strength and your energy? And I'd like to encourage folks who maybe haven't spoken yet, but maybe you have something to share too.
I'll speak. I think for me, it's not so much about finding what motivates me. I am a part of the community, and so for me, it's not just me feeling like I have to do this, or I have to get this energy. I feel like I am a part of this community, and so I have to fight for the community. And so that's where my motivation comes from, is knowing that I am the vast majority of Black people. I am one of them. And so in being that, I want to do things that will lead to liberating Black people, because it'll be liberating myself as an individual. And so seeing myself in that way helps me think through some of the challenges that I encounter when, I do feel overwhelmed, or when I do hit roadblocks. It's like, well, you're trying to change an entire system of oppression that's existed, way before you, and that there's so many different parts and so many intricacies. Like, it is going to be hard. There are going to be challenges, because power structures don't want to change, right? And so I think that helps me with kind of dealing with sometimes like that heavy weight that you do feel. But also knowing that other people are also fighting, right? And that there have been people before me. So kind of reaching through history and drawing on the strengths of ancestors, or the people that have done the work, and even the people that are on the ground doing the very work now while we're having this conversation, knowing that they've been doing it. And so leaning on that has been really, really powerful for me.
Thank you for that, Frances. Yeah, you touch on so many things that are real. So like the strength and hope that comes from, and motivation that comes from knowing who you are, knowing who your community is, and that historical awareness, like that is so clutch to radical healing, and or definitely the hope and motivation side of it. Thank you for sharing that. VK, I saw you had maybe wanted to say something.
I don't know. Can you hear me? Okay. What I was gonna say is that for me, it's really in peer support that I find motivation. Like I was invited by a peer to join in on this discussion, and it's already been so comforting to hear everybody speak up. I have been in a position where, like, recently I've even considered quitting my program because of just like how worn out people can get by how uninspiring and disappointing things can be. And having a supervisor that was Latino and able to connect to what I was thinking through and sort of bring it back to like what you're feeling right now is the reason why you need to be in this field. Like, you are filling the gap that you would feel should you continue to complete your training. That has been what has sort of kept me going.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really powerful when it only takes one person to encourage you to keep going. But it is hard work to be the trailblazer sometimes, right? If you're the one who's filling that gap. So thank you for sharing that. That's related to one of our next questions, really, is like, how have you found community and support among people of color and Indigenous people in the various spaces that you've been navigating as students?
Hi, it's Gabe again. I think as a Filipino doctoral student clinician, someone interested in psychology, it was really difficult to find anyone in my community. And I was okay with kind of looking for other Filipino psychologists or anyone just interested in psychology. It was really hard to find those spaces, those people that were interested, just because it's not a career path that a lot of people of my own identity end up choosing or seeking out, as motivated as I was. And I would say it was kind of like by luck, honestly, like just for me going to conventions, just talking and putting myself out there, which is not an easy thing to do for me. While I'm able to talk right now, I'm a very shy. It's really hard to talk to people sometimes. And it required me to kind of get out of my own comfort zone to go find people of my own community that I needed for my own development, to see that there was actually people like me out there. So I think it was by luck going to conventions and just talking. But I think the main theme behind that was it's difficult, I think, at least from my own experience, to actually go find those people. Now I have my niche, I have my community. I don't know where I'd be without them, both Filipino, Asian, people of color in general. But just took a lot of work, I think.
Yeah, it's hard work. We have to find our own paths and make our own way, and hope. And it sounds like some of us are creating that pathway. Hopefully, this is a pathway of connection. But yeah, that's tiring. I think about, for me, seeking folks out at conferences. I think about as I talk about when I first got to Lexington, Kentucky, I was like, feeling really isolated, going to the community center and just like volunteering, just wanted to be in community with my neighbors versus the people at my university, and like try to build community that way. As I was learning what it meant to be an activist or develop as an organizer, like trying to, like, how do you show up to a protest and then extend that relationship, and continue relationships in that way? And so then having to juggle, right, the psychological conferences that you go to, as well as maybe activist space and conference and community, and do that work. But it's been the most amazing, fruitful thing in the world. It's definitely been my survival. Maybe the only other thing I would shout out before I give some space back up is the mentorship program through Division 45 was actually how I connected with Dr. Neville and was able to have her as my wonderful mentor. But like, Division 45 has been home, community, and that mentorship program, and the things that they've provided has been like everything to both my education and just individual, personal, holistic sort of wellness. What about for others?
Yeah, I want to second what you both have said. And I think for me was really recognizing that the work that I was committed to is interdisciplinary, and valuing that interdisciplinary work and engaging with other scholars who were doing the type of work that I wanted to do that weren't necessarily psychologists. That has been really, really powerful for me, especially when I'm trying to create work or commit to doing work that is not so widely accepted in the discipline. So for me, it was reaching out to other Black women in other professions who are amazing and maybe are looking at activism from different perspective, whether they're looking at it through literature, Africana studies, I mean, you name it. And that has been really, really wonderful, because we are talking about some of the same concepts, but we just have different lenses, and they have informed my work so much. So really reaching out and thinking interdisciplinary, especially when I look at my work, but also just not being afraid to speak to other students of color, whether that's an externship or going to conferences and conventions, and just walking around and meeting people and being on different panels. Like Ruben and I were on a panel together, and so we got to connect that way. And then Helen introduced me to Della, so we started speaking to each other through that means. But really just being open to meeting people who may not be close to you, but are doing similar work, or maybe are doing different work, but there's ways in which you can collaborate. That has really, really just been wonderful.
Yeah, so much has been said here, and I think it all resonates with me. Particularly the part about interdisciplinary collaboration. Because what I learned was at a certain point, I felt so alienated at a predominantly white institution. I ain't care. I just wanted somebody who saw the world how I saw it, like who knew what my experience felt like. And, you know, like I said, it was those 3 queer Black women who were undergraduates. I mean, they saved me. Like, I mean, it was such a validating space. And from there, because I think sometimes, whether it's because of our status, our position, our rank, we say, those people don't get it. I want to find people on my level. Now, I let go of that real quick, because what I found out was my peers, they didn't care about it how I cared about it. You know, some people who even studied this stuff, you know, you could be doing work, critical work, and this stuff not touch you. So it's like, nah, I want anybody. I don't care if you're younger than me, older than me. I just want somebody where we can at least have some level of interest convergence. And you know, this was students, faculty, staff. I remember it was hard because even within communities, you know, there's, you know, a spectrum of people in their level of understanding or engagement. And at one point, I created a student group, and it wasn't affiliated with the university. I wanted a space. Basically what I'm saying is, like, if there wasn't a space, I created it. There wasn't a space where students of color could come together and just talk about things and just be who they were, you know, without feeling like they had to act or behave a certain way or have some kind of university oversight over them. So what did I do? I created a group. Every week for an hour or so, we would get together and we would talk about things that mattered to us. I think at that time, you know, you had the Bree Newsome situation going on, the Dylan Roof, and, you know, universities don't always prioritize discussing these situations. So, like, we just held a conversation, and some of the most touching things came out of those spaces, and it was just super validating. You know, faculty of color who were in our department, you know, they opened up their office just to have space for me to just talk. You know, were they going to go to the protests and such? No, but maybe everybody has a different role, and even just creating that space was powerful. And this is, I'm talking about faculty of color, but there was some white faculty. I'll never forget when things were flying in fall 2015, right after the resignations of the then president and then chancellor. My supervisor, he let me get out of my client responsibilities. He was like, Ruben, I know this thing is stressful. I mean, that was powerful. That's validating. Like, so activism and resistance looks different. I see what, you know, my white supervisor, what he did for me at that time, that was liberating in some ways. And then I want to shout out the staff. Sometimes the staff at some of these institutions are some of the most down-to-earth, loving, kind people. And I've gotten probably some of the best support that I will from staff. And this isn't always professional staff. Sometimes this is a custodial worker who you see all the time who just got good energy and says, I'm here for you, I support you. So really any and everybody, I try to find, you know, where our level of interest convergence is. And I try to make it a reciprocal thing. How can I help you? How can you help me?
I love that, Ruben. Maybe as we wind down a little bit, I'm wondering if we can return to maybe the early question about our hopes. And so it sounds like we came in with some hopes to the different spaces we're navigating, and there was several things that showed up, different forms of oppression, different experiences with hate, whether it was on a global scale or at our institutions, that maybe diminished some of that. And then we've been rebuilt up and found community and found ways of sourcing ourselves or holding on to our source. And I wonder what our hopes are now as we are where we are with this full awareness of our community, of our goals, of those initial hopes that we had, as well as like the realness of the struggles that we face. What are our hopes going forward? Thinking about especially our changing places of power.
For me, my goal is that by the time I leave my program, there are more minority students there than there were when I started off. And I have worked up to a point as far as I could towards that goal. Sometimes I feel like I won't accomplish anything, but sometimes I feel like I do. And most importantly, I feel like my hope is that when those students come to the program, that the invitation for diversity isn't an invitation to come and assimilate, and instead an invitation to come and bring in their different culture to the group supervisions and to all the contexts where we feel honored. So that's my goal here.
I want to echo that too. I think my hope, and we often forget this, like being students and feeling like we're going to be students forever, but we're going to blink and be out in the professional world at some point, and knowing that there's going to be hopefully continual generations, just years, cohorts of students coming in, and to invite, my hope is to continue to have these types of conversations and to invite it, have spaces. Ideally, like I would like to have these types of conversations at my own campus, but even just in general, I think just being a part of these overall conversations is important, and to also be mindful of the students that are incoming in these programs and wanting to, again, it's a long time, it feels like we're still in it right now, but to be mindful that we can stand as the mentors that we aspire to be, like looking at the mentors that really affect us, blink, and at some point we will be those mentors for incoming students. And to, in a way, the hope and the power that comes in that is something that we can also invite these conversations for more people too.
Hi everyone, my name is Ailey. I joined a little late, but yeah, I definitely want to take a little time to answer that question. So just, I am a second year counseling psychology student at the University of North Dakota. So definitely finding community, finding all sorts of things is very difficult up here, especially half of the time you're having snowstorms, you can't leave. Yeah, definitely one of the hopes that I have is to really change the narrative of how Latinx people, especially Latinx immigrants, are being portrayed. There are different things that I go to speak to classes. I'm actually going to speak to my own some of my classmates that are either in the first cohort or master's programs, to really for them to learn more about and to have more critical conversations as to one way or another, different things that are going on are going to affect them, particularly at the government level. And also, after graduating, I definitely echo Gabe's statements that I want to continue having those conversations and to really let people know that when you give racialized minorities, when you give people of color those chances, that we really can do great work out there. And really kind of, not only that, but it's like really, I feel like at my university, there's been so many times where I had to like fight for spaces or even fight for people's time because my experiences really haven't been, maybe sometimes they haven't been seen as important. And this has been more at the administrative level rather than program level. I'm very lucky to have an advisor who also identifies as Latina. That has been very helpful for me. But definitely being one of the two Latinas in my program is really hard, especially when we're like different levels in the program, and sometimes one of us is more committed than others, so it's really difficult too. And not only that, but also just really continue to use my privileges. I was previously undocumented, but now I'm a U.S. citizen, and really that has been one of my motivations. To really being able to use that not only to ground me, but to keep pushing forward, to continue to advocate for my communities and their intersectional identities.
Thank you for sharing, Ailey. I know all of you in today's conversation is giving me a lot of hope. Y'all also brought up a lot of memories of grad school for me. Some not so great, some fond memories, and me realizing, so many different spaces that did fuel me. Going to the first ISPRC conference at Boston College I just needed that. It was so powerful. That was 2001, y'all. So it was really needed. And so when you talk about conferences and meeting folks and being in this space, it's so amazing that we're talking to people from all over the country today. I appreciate all of you and just the energy and the optimism and hope you all bring. I thank you for that, and really hope that we can continue the conversation in various ways too. Della, do you have some closing thoughts?
Yeah, this has just been special. It's been sacred. I'm really grateful to have been able to hold space with you all and for you to let us see you, hear you, let us in that way. Knowing what's been shared and kind of the weight of it, it's like, for me, I feel like when I am honored to hear someone's story, I have accountability to it. And so I feel accountable to what you've shared with me today. And I'm going to hold and carry you with me. And I hope that's something that we can all do. And knowing that we're just representations of one of so many people like us. And that, I don't know, I'm feeling full and hopeful and sad and grounded in reality at the same time. And so I'm really maybe throwing it back to Dr. Neville, thanking you for this vision of radical healing and looking forward to what the rest of this year will look like as we continue to have these webinars and this conversation on Twitter and creating the community that is starting to exist, but is in too few spaces.
Since we're at time, I just wanted to say thank you all for attending today, but I also wanted to just give a little bit of space of last few words that people wanted to just share with each other.
Yeah, I am super thankful for you all and hosting this. Dr. Neville, the task force, guests. Kind of just to answer that question, I feel like the hope. This is the hope for me. I feel like I want to live in a world of visionaries, and I think it starts with each one of us, and we're doing that work. So, I mean, that's the hope right there. People who can see a different society, people who can see a different institution, people who can see the change in themselves, like, that is powerful and that is motivating, and I see it in each of you all, so I have a lot of gratitude. So thank you all so much for what you are doing in your own spaces, for yourself, and for the world. It's important.
I also want to say thank you. This is like my first time going to participating in one of these activities, and just knowing that this type of community exists is amazing for me. And Ailey, that you spoke like as a Latina that is now a citizen, I got served my deportation papers this week. And just like, it is inspiring to know like there's other people that have been through it that are still in programs and they're still working through it all. Thanks.
I just want to thank you all so much for having this platform, for creating this conversation. I'm really honored to be amongst all of you. And I think just to kind of echo some of the words that has already been said, I think, I think my hope is that we all continue to create spaces of healing for ourselves and for other people. I hope that we never forget that part of social justice is action, right? And that can look different for each one of us, but as long as we keep that in perspective, I think we'll be all right. And that we are part of the communities that we are talking about, that we are studying. And so, to remain connected. And I think once you remain connected, then the work becomes authentic and it remains authentic. So thank you so much for just your openness and your willingness to share and be in community this afternoon.
I also wanted to give a tremendous thank you to each of you for being here, and to the panelists, particularly for speaking your truths and sharing your stories. And I realize how powerful they are and how transformative they are, because not only are you creating space and community here, but I envision people looking at these and hearing your stories, and that's going to create future spaces and opportunities for folks to understand and dialogue dialogue and feel validated and affirmed. So I am just in awe of each of you and the strength you have and your courage, conviction, insight, and wisdom. So if I were to say hope, I see you as hope. You are hope, and you provide me hope to continue on and doing what small things that I can do to promote change and healing in the communities I belong. So thank each of you, and thank you, Grace and Della, for co-facilitating this. You just did a masterful job, and so thanks.
Thank you, everyone. We'll be signing off now.